dear friends, colleagues. We are going to have another virtual presentation. This is Mrs. Christine Gilling. I had the pleasure to meet her in the IAEA. She's supporting one of our work in the Decommissioning and Environmental Remediation section. We have a team of environmental remediation and a team on decommissioning. And my colleagues in decommissioning, they are developing a project that is about repurposing nuclear facilities in the scope of the context of decommissioning. And Christina is supporting this activity. So I think that she makes a perfect expert to talk about the concept of sustainability and circularity in the scope of decommissioning. And of course, you have been already introduced to these concepts in the context of environmental remediation. So you can see in the context of decommissioning what could be similarities, where these things go apart. And remember what I have said in the beginning on Monday, the definition of decommissioning, the definition of remediation, the framework that applied to one, and the framework that applies to the other one. And I have discussed with her while we were coming back. At any time, any doubt, you can just stop it and ask question, and there will be time by the end of the discussions for additional questions. And she has already pre-prepared 5 questions that I will be sharing with you. Maybe you can ask those questions by the end, and then we will have volunteers here. And if there is no volunteer, I will volunteer one for you. And then you will share your views, and then we can discuss. Without further ado, I give the floor, or the screen, so to speak, to Christina. Thank you very much to assist us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. So I'm joining you virtually from Sweden, where I grew up and started working in nuclear waste management, so long-term management of the Swedish spent fuel in particular at SKB. And then I've also lived in Canada for many years and worked as a consultant there, merged more into decommissioning planning. And I also have a background in sustainability and now more recently circular economy. So it's in trying to put all of these concepts together and kind of taking a big picture view where I'm involved a lot, including as Horst said for the IAEA, and I'm very happy to be here and share some really more of a discussion thinking kind of presentation than so much the practical aspects, which I know you've done a lot or in this or previously in the course. So, okay, let's hope this works. So the current nuclear facilities, when I looked at the numbers, it's more than 800 research reactors, and I believe more than 600 power reactors that have been built to date. And I would say that, if not all, the vast majority, they were designed and built without thinking of sustainability or circularity in mind, because to some degree the concepts didn't even exist when most of the reactors were built back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Now, more recently, reusing, repurposing, recycling, they are being used and they're gaining more and more interest. And again, from the IAEA, even there is efforts and conferences and technical meetings where this is being discussed. And we do know there are quite a lot of owners and power utilities that are involving the concepts. But I would argue that it's so far very unclear, what does it actually mean if you want to have a sustainability approach or a circular economy approach when you plan and propose your decommissioning. So that's what really the question that we'll have at the back of our mind for this presentation. You've probably seen these concepts. I will not spend a lot of time on this, but just to highlight a few things on the definitions. Of course, the UN Frontline Commission definition, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So what I want to highlight here is that there's a time dimension, a temporal dimension, when we look at and compare the two concepts in particular. I believe that's important. And the three pillars that we all know about, the environmental, social, and economic aspects of sustainability. What I'm mentioning here is I will actually not really go into those in details in this presentation. I know you discussed it a lot, and they're highly relevant and key when it comes to developing indicators. But again, for this hour, I'm thinking big picture, holistic thinking, and then I would say it's less relevant. And just to exemplify, with a simple cup of tea, you have environmental aspects, right? When you grow and you transport the tea, it's definitely a social dimension in having your tea, and there's economic aspects. But when you put them all together at the holistic level, it's a cup of tea. Circular economy definition, there are many out there, but ISO in their recent definition, what I wanted to highlight here is the link to sustainability. So circular economy, I think they many times are used interchangeably, which isn't really right, but the link is clear here. An economic system that uses a systemic approach to maintain a circular flow of resources by recovering, retaining, or adding to their value while contributing to sustainable development. So circular economy can be one way towards a more sustainable future. And what the cornerstones then, and a big difference between the two concepts, of course, is circular economy really is about the materials, how we use, how we distribute the tangible materials, whereas sustainability really is the goals. It doesn't say how to reach them, right? Circular economy, the idea is really to eliminate waste, more to mimic nature, where we know there is no waste. Everything, a leaf that falls from a tree, it becomes food for somewhere else. It's not waste. And circular economy, key is you design it, you design for it. It's really hard, not impossible, to add it on later. There are things you can do, but you need to think about it before you design or build something. The work in practice and in research so far, I would say, is mainly focused on products. Like how do you design a washing machine or a car or a tool in your home, or conventional buildings, where you live, where you work, and so on, office buildings, stores. So the question I'm posing then is, what a nuclear power plant that is operating and that consists of thousands of products with different types of materials, how does that become circular? How do you, can you still apply the same principles? There's really not much work in that, especially something so specialized as a nuclear power plant with its unique hazards and so on. So again, in this presentation, big picture, holistic thinking, using of course the same principles, but more at the aggregate level. Last concept in terms of definition that is key to this, of course, is nuclear decommissioning. And I looked up I'm not going to go through all the detail, but I do think the IAEA glossary's definition has some really interesting aspects. It's about allowing the removal of regulatory controls. But the norm, I would say, in the industry, although it is changing, really is remove everything, right? It's all waste. It has to go back to brownfield or greenfield, and then you can make it available for other uses. I've seen this in many nuclear decommissioning plants. And I would argue it doesn't really align with the IAEA definition very well, because if you read the fine print, the information items, the IAEA definition says it typically includes dismantling, taking all the structures apart, but in the IAEA's usage, this need not be the case. So even the IAEA definition opens up to actually keeping things, because we know in this world of sustainability and circularity, we try very hard not to create waste, but the nuclear industry, I would say, it's still more or less the norm, that you think of the facility that's no longer in operation as it has to all come down and become waste, and the waste will take care of all of it. We take care of, although it is changing slowly. The use of the term decommissioning, again, this is from IAEA's definition, implies that no further use of the facility for its existing purpose. So again, it opens up that you can use it for something else. A facility or its remaining parts may also be considered decommissioned if it is incorporated into a new or existing facility. Again, the IAEA definition already contains it, but I think that the norm again is that it's waste, it's legacy, it needs to be taken down. So very linear thinking. And last point here on the slide, very important. We know nuclear structures, systems, components were built to last, right? To take up they have typical design life, but they were really built to be robust and take up shock. So one would think if we try to recycle everything else in our world, from small aluminum cans, right? Paper and so on, why would we not try to reuse the very large, robust structures that were built to take up shocks to the system? A few words about the waste hierarchy, a very common approach embraced, of course, in the world in general, but I would say very much so in the nuclear industry. It is used, it is very valuable, but in my opinion, it tends to be confused with circular economy, whereas circularity is much more. Again, it's you need to design for it, you really intend to eliminate waste, and it has other aspects too. But it's important to at least keep in mind that it is being used and is very helpful in at least reducing the amount of waste that's generated from a nuclear plant, whether it's during operation or during commissioning. Now, if you take that circularity, like I said, it's more than the waste hierarchy. Two scales, I think, that are helpful is to think in terms of the space, that you have large amounts of materials at a nuclear power plant. They sit in components, or systems and components. In turn, they are part of buildings. But then when you go outside the fence line of the nuclear site, you are part of a community, typically, right? All the people that work at your facility, they tend to live not too far away, at least. And these communities are part of a bigger region. So when you think circularity and moving things back and forth, you can, of course, move within the site, but also think outside the fence if you truly want to be contributing to a circular economy. Now, there's also an aspect of time, and we have these typical stages. We'll come back to that soon, but just to think circular, you construct, so you can design your facility. So the things you use for construction, you can use for operation and so on. The things in your operational phase, you can maybe have be of value during safe storage, which is that period of time that some facilities use between you operate and once you start decommissioning the site. And then you take things apart, and then you release the site from regulatory control, which really is, again, the definition of decommissioning. So just to keep that in mind as background for further. Now, how do you convert that? We live primarily, and in particular, I would say in the nuclear industry, in quite a linear world. Partly maybe due to history. This is when they were built. But I think also maybe largely because of the phases that are so strongly linked to licensing. So in order to be allowed to operate a nuclear facility, of course, first you need to site and evaluate the site, to design, construct, and so on. And this light green operational phase is really the main point, right? That's why you all do all these things both before and after. It's to operate the plant, and whether it's a research facility or a power facility or a waste facility, that's the whole point. That's why you spend all this money and time. And then you decommission and for regulatory control. So again, it's very linear. But just for to try to see what would work then, what would it be if we bend this linear structure? Because, and using a site perspective, not a licensing perspective, because from a site point of view, I think you can safely say that once you've chosen a nuclear site, it's kind of forever marked, even if it's been decommissioned and removed. It will, I think, for the memory of society, tend to be associated with at least a former nuclear site. So there's really no end out of this loop, in my opinion, at least conceptually. So you site and evaluate, again, you construct and commission, you operate this light green, and then you decommission. But like I said, the site will kind of forever be marked. Now, one could think of this as not really decommissioning and building new. What if you combine those two, decommissioning and construction, so that you still site, you have your initial construction and commissioning, and then you operate, and then you transform the site into a new use, a second or even a third type of use. And this is what we're saying, just because of the age distribution, we are seeing it. In some cases, it's they decommission and it becomes a waste facility. In some cases, it's kind of sitting there, not really doing, you can still do some things. And we are seeing examples where they do want to convert to maybe a different type of power or new types of reactors. Small modular reactors, of course, are very popular topic these days. So maybe using the site to build new small modular reactors, for example. So it is happening, but the term as such is not a formal word. It's just kind of for a mind model to think of it and simplify that once you operated your first time, it's really about transforming the site, even if you're just bringing it back to nature and greenfield. If you really want to be circular for a mental model, you would then also need to add the flows of things to and from the site. And the special things with nuclear facilities, I would say, is you have to separate the non-radioactive materials, the darker in this figure, from the radioactive materials, because they are, of course, subject to different regulations, right, and hazards. So I'm not going to go into details, just to give you kind of a mental model of thinking outside the box, outside the circle, maybe. Now, if you apply that thinking and convert it, I know this is about circularity and sustainability and decommissioning, but it's really hard to do that without looking at the whole life cycle. So that's why I wanted to at least spend a few minutes on this. Now, if you take that mental model from the previous picture, there are things you could do regardless of the phase you're in, including whether you call it decommissioning or transformation. And this is what we'll be talking about the rest of the facility. I just wanted to show, I'm not going to go into details, but that, again, whether you site or you're already constructing or you're already in operation, there are things you can do as well as decommission, even if you didn't think about it when you designed it. And that's my point. We can do better. The industry can do better. Although many, we're not that bad in terms of circularity, but we can definitely do better. So examples of some current practices that are already being used in decommissioning, taking that previous slide at the table, just to highlight a few things. There are examples where parts or even whole sites are being repurposed. they're not that many. I would expect it's growing, because again, if you have all these assets, why take it down and build something new? And to the top right is an example from Germany, where they converted a turbine hall into a conventional facility to build and assemble large cranes. So it has nothing to do with nuclear, but just to highlight, you have a big hall, use it for something instead of building a new building, right? That's the whole point. If you can reduce the facility footprint, many of you're talking nuclear power plants, they're very large. The majority of the site isn't even nuclear, it's buildings for storage or training or other things. So if you wanted to, you can reduce the facility footprint and use the rest of the site for something else. This is being used, not systematically, I would say, but there definitely are examples. Interim uses during safe storage. So in nuclear power plants, I don't know if you've gone into this concept, but it's common that once you've stopped operation, there is a period of where you let the radioactivity decay for 20, 30, 40, or even longer periods, and then you take it apart and decommission or dismantle the facilities. So if you have it sitting there for decades, there's certainly some things you can do in the meantime. Again, this is happening. Nothing else, just to use it for waste storage or something like that. Site restoration, I won't go into. You spent a lot of time in this, but I mean, that's also in a way circularity, because some circularity definitions, it includes the ecosystems. So turning it back to nature definitely is in line with circularity as well. Reusing individual systems and components, whether it's on the same site or a different nuclear site, or selling to, you have, again, the majority is not radioactive, it's just conventional materials or systems, a pump, a tank, things like that. Recycling of metals and other materials is being done, and in an increasing degree. There are challenges with that, but it is certainly being done. Very common practice is to take the demolished concrete and fill it, if you have voids in the land, to take these materials and use that rather than having new materials. But it's in line with circularity, but of course it's kind of a last resort. If you can use the building for something else, that's better, because that's part of circularity, that you want to aim for the highest value. And if you demolished it and crushed it and it's just rubble, it's better than using new rubble, but it's again kind of a last resort. Reprocessing of spent fuel, it's done in some countries. Yes, it's in line with circularity that you reuse the uranium and plutonium, but in the same token, you do create much waste because of building reprocessing facilities. So it's debatable how circular it is, but I included it nevertheless. And I would say that immediate dismantling strategy is a principle that, as far as I understand, it's becoming more and more common, or at least it's being emphasized as a good practice, that you don't sit and wait for decades, but start decommissioning as soon as you can. And if you do that, it means that you open up the site for new productive uses. So again, it's part of, it would be consistent with circularity. Now, just to exemplify other things, because I believe the nuclear industry is doing actually really well, and it's improving in terms of doing things that are consistent with circularity, but we're not very good at saying it, because we're so, and rightly so, focused on safety, that it's hard to maybe shift the mind and think of these things as consistent with circular economy. But if you use something for longer, you have a thing and use it for longer, that's key in circular economy, right? So if you extend the life of your power plant, which is happening, maybe more for economic reasons, but nevertheless, it's definitely circular economy, but it's not flagged as such. Power operating, that is, if you have a 1,000 megawatt power plant and you increase it by 20%, you use the same thing for more, produce more power, or you add, as I know they've done in Canada more recently, you have an existing power plant, you add, I don't know exactly how they do it, but they modify the design, so they put things in, meaning you actually produce radioisotopes that you can use in medicine or industry. So again, you have something, you use it for longer, you use it for more things, it's spot on circular economy, but we're not really mentioning it. That's why I want to mention that too as a bit of a side note. Now, how circular you can become, whether it's an existing reactor or a new reactor, really varies. And for sure, if you design and you haven't even built your reactor yet, you definitely have the potential to become much more circular in terms of your facility than if it's an existing one. Although, as I mentioned, there's still things you can do even if you built it in the 1970s or so. The regulatory requirements differ greatly between countries, and if you want to clear things so you can either reuse the components somewhere else, or you want to recycle your metals or so, what your clearance criteria are to release from regulatory control will greatly impact how much, which volumes we're talking about. The general interest in striving towards circularity, of course, varies between countries as well, and over time, I believe this will become more and more of a topic, and that there will be support for it, because in line with general trends of recognizing that the resources we have taken out of the ground, let's use them. Let's use them for good things and to reduce the waste and avoid taking up new materials from the ground. And then last but not least, the acceptance by members of the public or by stakeholders. Let's say you're going to recycle the metals from a decommissioned plant. You need the facilities, the recycling facilities, the users of the materials, et cetera, to be on board and be okay with having metal or other materials from a nuclear plant that has been in operation. Now, I also wanted to probe some thinking in terms of expanding the circularity horizon, I called it. We have a tendency, I think, in the industry to think of, okay, what's on the site and how can that be used somewhere else? But you can also reverse those flows and think, okay, what's outside my site that could be of value on the site? This is an example. I mentioned I used to work there a long time ago at SKB, the Swedish Nuclear Fuel and Waste Management Company. They have a lab that's to try to do welding testing of containers that are intended to be used for encapsulation of the spent fuel before it goes into a deep geological disposal one day. So instead of building a new building, they purchased an old large building that was part of a shipyard. It's close to SKB, it's outside the site, but just to exemplify where you can also think, in circular thinking, you need to think what's outside that is of value. But it can also be small. A good example, I think, is I know a facility where the workers had, when they did refurbishment and maintenance, they had a lot of problems. The workers at the site, they stole the towels after they, showered at the end of the work. They liked the towels, they took them home. So they just keep buying towels and thought, that's not good. So they took discarded towels from hotels. That, when you're a hotel, they're not, at some point they're not good enough, they become waste. So this plant, they took those towels instead. So it's a small thing, but just an example of, again, where I think our sites could actually take waste from others, which means that the overall volume reduces of waste. Coordination with conventional construction demolition projects. I wrote how you can coordinate, use the same tools, the same staff, for example, minimize water and power consumptions, and the list goes on. These are just I just wanted to highlight that we need to think outside the site itself for really circularity. So, okay, so let's move away from the circularity concept and talk more about sustainability, which again is the overarching bigger goal. And I'm probing the question of what if nuclear decommissioning as a whole is viewed as a sustainability problem? What would sustainable decommissioning look like? And I know you talked about sustainable remediation. I believe, could be very wrong, that in the site remediation, you come much further in terms of integrating sustainability thinking than in decommissioning, but we're catching up. But the effort so far that I've seen is there's definitely sustainability thinking in many decommissioning projects, but it tends to be thinking that, the typical, again, linear way, but add on things that make it more sustainable. Use a, electric vehicle for transporting things on site instead of diesel engines. But it's still the same mindset, just tweaks. And what I'm saying is, what if we flip it and think really of decommissioning as a whole? Because there's really a lot of assets there. Now, why is sustainability relevant even for decommissioning? Again, to think this holistic way. Well, for bigger facilities at least, and especially if you include the waste, we're dealing with multi-generational timescales in decommissioning. Many of those reactors that were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s have been taken out of operation, and they are still sitting there or will stay there for many decades. And again, add the waste, it definitely becomes very long timescales. Decommissioning, I think it is often forgotten that it's really part of the bigger picture. I live in a small town. A few decades ago, there was a big facility that was going to shut down, a conventional manufacturing, and the whole town was desperate. Oh, we're going to lose all these jobs. We're going to lose this money. What happens to our town? Where all the people are going to move. All the young people are going to definitely move. So, and we talk about sustainability. These are very real social, economic impacts. And of course, it's also environmental, right? If you decommission, you're going to transport things. There's going to be dust and noise and emissions. So again, just for relevance, it really is, I would say decommissioning is a sustainability problem more than a technical problem. Right now, the industry is relatively fragmented. We have waste experts, we have decommissioning experts, we have environmental experts and so on, but it is maybe going towards that way, but it's not really cohesive. And this is where sustainability can help, because kind of by definition, it takes that higher level. And right now, maybe again, because of the licensing steps I showed you earlier, the very fixed and important steps we do have and still need, but I think that means the industry has a tendency to think within the fence line, so to speak, the site boundaries, and not think of the society outside. And we think until released from regulatory control. So once you cleared your site and you don't need that nuclear license, you're done. Rather than thinking what happens after. And from the community perspective, from the site perspective, as I mentioned before, it doesn't end. It's just a new use, even if it hasn't been defined. So in sustainable development, that big holistic view, you need systems thinking. Now, when I say systems thinking in the nuclear industry, many think in systems engineering, or the systems we have in a nuclear power plant. And these are complicated systems. Complicated systems, they consist of many parts, but they are predictable, like your car, same thing, or a nuclear power plant in this example. So you press a button and you expect a certain things to happen, even if it has many parts. Complex adaptive systems are very different. This is ecosystems. This is your city, or the university you go to, or your family. Even our own bodies are a complex adaptive system, and they act very differently. They constantly change and evolve. They are not predictable. And in sustainable development research, this concept is very often used. This type of system is a model that helps in understanding vulnerabilities in ecosystems and so on, and how to make them resilient. And in this sustainability research, one figure that's often used is the adaptive cycle. And it models complex adaptive system in a very simple way. So any complex adaptive system, it builds up its parts, right? Again, a forest or a lake or a company that starts out small, then it grows, and then you have more and more resources. It becomes rigid and more vulnerable, actually, in this conservation stage until it collapses. You maybe have heard of tipping points. So it collapses, it releases its part, the company goes bankrupt, the forest goes up in flames, its nutrients are released, then you have reorganization. I'm not going to go into details, I just wanted to show it because I believe this proves that the sustainability mindset is very relevant in nuclear decommissioning. Because if you think about it, at a nuclear site, you construct it, you build up your plant, you operate it, you shut it down, which kind of means that the system collapses in a sense, and then you release your part. That's what you do when you decommission, right? And then you do something else with the site. So it's just to illustrate that why I believe it's highly relevant to approach it as a sustainability problem. I mentioned resilience. You might be familiar with that, but if not, very quickly, resilience of a complex adaptive system, it's a key concept. And what it means is the ability to take up a shock to your system. So if you have a resilient forest and you have a storm, it can take up those storms better than if it's a forest has low resilience, and that's not healthy. Same with lakes, same with companies actually, and the same with a nuclear site. They're non-linear systems, and surprise is inevitable, what I wrote. And again, I view this as relevant for nuclear decommissioning and waste management, so back-end management in general, because we know there are surprises there. Things actually tend not to go as planned, especially when it comes to building new waste facilities. There's multiple examples where a country tries, they implement, they work very hard, spend years or decades in trying to implement a waste disposal facility, and then something happens and it doesn't go as planned. Or decommissioning. You have a plan, you intend to shut down the facility at a certain year, and then all of a sudden they extend and want to operate for another 20 years. This is happening over and over. Again, surprises are inevitable with complex adaptive systems. On these now more kind of mental models, but why I think this would be helpful if you view decommissioning as a sustainability problem. Now, I mentioned tipping points. So if you have an ecosystem or another type of system that are, it's often described as kind of two different bowls or regimes. There's a tipping point and you flip into a different regime. Again, take your forest, one day it's fine, the next day it's burnt. These days, unfortunately, this happens often. A coral reef that's healthy and then something happens and it becomes bleached. Sometimes you can flip between these two. A company that goes bankrupt, all of a sudden it shifts into a different regime, right? Why is this relevant for a nuclear power site or a nuclear site of any kind, actually? I believe we could, as a mental model, be helped by thinking of regime shifts. Because once you have, there's a benefit perspective you want the site to be in operation, right? You want to produce the power or have the reactor be operational for research or whatever the service, the output of the site is. So when you permanently shut down, the site flips into this middle bowl that, it's not productive. It's just sitting there. It's a lot of resources. You need people still working there. It costs money, but you're not getting any output. So this middle one is really not good for society. It's not beneficial. But there will be a future where you have new uses on the site, whether you plan it or not. If nothing else, nature will take over one day, right? So there will be one day when you have productive uses again coming out of the site. And I believe if we use this mental model, we want to go as quickly as possible from the first one to the third one, right? But what's happening in practice is, I mentioned before, many nuclear sites that have been operating, shut down, they're just sitting there. One can discuss why that is, but maybe it's just there's no real incentive to move on and get over and have new site uses, whatever they may be. It can be a new nuclear power plant, it can be solar plant, it can be other industries, or it can be rewilding, give it back to nature, because that is still more valuable than just having the plant sit there, the built environment. So if you do that, sorry, there's a lot of text on this one, but if you use the sustainability lens and try to get from the first bowl to the last one as quickly as possible, there are things that you can do. And this is, again, where I hope that a sustainability lens to decommissioning as a whole is helpful. And what comes out when you think of that is focus on the site transformation. What's that new use? And create a shared vision. What does that site look like once you're done? And we know this is being applied in some cases, but it's not the norm, I would say. It's important to involve the local stakeholders, have their input be part of the decision making, because these are your future workers if it's going to be a new plant, or it's your neighbors. You need them on board, and they might be very knowledgeable and have great ideas for what to do the site. So involve them. Be inclusive, and especially involve the young people in the community, right? Because they are the ones that are going to live there. They will inherit the place, whether you just let it sit or you do something with the site. I've written applying ecosystem services approach. Or maybe some of you have a background in this from environmental or sustainability studies, but ecosystem services is a common term used, again, in sustainability research, where a site what's the value from it? What's the output? It can be, again, for a forest, it produces oxygen, it produces food, it produces trees that can be timber and that you use in your house or burn for fire, right? You can use that same concept in coming up with a future vision. And why I believe this is important is if you do that together with your stakeholders, you will have a much more resilient process that will take you to the end. And we have seen examples of this where they visualize and do visioning exercises together with stakeholders, but it's not the norm, unfortunately. And one example then at the bottom, how you could do this in practice, if you think of what's the current output, what's the current value from a site during operation. It's typically power, right, from a power site at least. It provides jobs, you get income, whether it's tax money into the local community. Some sites are big, they are habitat for wildlife, and you often store waste or process waste there. So if you want to use a sustainability mindset to nuclear decommissioning and site transformation, it's what are these in the future? What do you want from this site? Maybe to have, again, jobs and so on. Maybe continue producing power. If you decide those, you would have a very resilient way of managing a project, because then things can change, they will change, but at least if you decided what's the important things we want out of the site, you can help create that in several different ways. So sustainability, as I mentioned at the beginning, has a temporal, a time aspect. So just a few things to highlight there. In current practices, decommissioning is often planned in detail without knowing that future use. And I believe that leads to suboptimal decision making, because if you knew you wanted to do, again, manufacturing or something else, you could very likely reuse more of the buildings. You need to think beyond decommissioning and specify those uses before you plan decommissioning in detail. What we've seen in up to date is those ideas, they might not come up until the facility is sitting there, because society changes, needs changes, priorities change. So, and that makes it a bit challenging, because even if you try, the needs will change. But it's good to be aware of that. Sometimes these great ideas don't come until the end. I showed in an earlier picture a research reactor in Stockholm, Sweden, where they did decommissioning. They took all the radiological hazards out. It was sitting there for 10, 20 years. And then someone had a great idea. Oh, let's make it into a research space. So research and venues. So they have like concerts and very advanced media technology research that's very, very exciting, but has nothing to do with nuclear. And it didn't happen until someone thought of it. That was years after. Repurposing of parts of the site. So you don't have to think of the whole site, right? Maybe there are things that you can do while other parts of the site are decaying, or you just don't have the money or whatever to decommission yet. Local stakeholders I've highlighted. These people are, often they work there or they know someone that worked there. They're typically very proud and knowledgeable. And with that time aspect, they will leave, they will pass away. So it's important to leverage this resource, use their knowledge before it's too late. And another aspect in terms of time is there's several examples where a facility has been sitting for years or decades waiting to be decommissioned. And it's only once they start, okay, now we're going to take it out. The local stakeholders say, no, wait, keep it. We want to preserve it, because they're proud. It's often suggestions of convert it into a museum and so on. So just aspects to take into consideration that are beyond the very technical things you do in decommissioning. So to wrap up, if you have that sustainability mindset of decommissioning as a whole, I believe these are key features. You need to view all the parts of the whole system as potential assets and get away from thinking, oh, this is waste, this is, just a problem. Because it depends on the use, if it's valuable or not, right? Even a contaminated site, even a facility where there's been accidents, it can still be of value in terms of research or training and so on. So it depends on the mind and the use. And in thinking of the whole system, I mean also people, the ecosystems on and outside, and things that are outside the site. If it's infrastructure. If you have the power lines that do it, use them, right? If you can. Use holistic integrated thinking. We can't just think of the technical aspects. We need to think of the what happens to the jobs, what happens to the property values of people's homes, the things that people are really concerned about. They need to feed into this. How are you going to replace the power, for example, when you're shut down? Include public and local stakeholders in the decision making. Create a vision after decommissioning, before doing the detailed planning. And of course, minimize negative environmental, social, and economic impacts that are, as I started, of course, part of sustainability, but at that kind of lower level. Expect the unexpected, because surprises will happen. The challenges, why is this not done? If it is a good idea, right? Why aren't we leveraging these things? Well, regulations and standards in our industry, they were developed for safety. I mentioned before, sustainability and circularity largely didn't even exist as concepts when the first wave of nuclear facilities were built. Another challenge, support from members of the public and stakeholders. They can vary quickly depending on what happens at the site or somewhere else. So that's hard to manage, and it's key, right, to have people on board. I do believe that, at least the examples we've seen, that people will be positive to repurpose a whole site, and that it likely increases over time. That is, if you have people tend to be very curious and want to see what's behind that fence. So I think it is possible, more than what's been done to date. And last but not least, as an industry, we're very risk averse, and that's a good thing when it's all about safety, but we also move very slowly. So it's how to change the mindset and the norm. I don't know, and it would take time if it's even desirable. Hopefully it is. Anyway, to conclude, some current practices definitely are consistent with sustainability and circularity when it comes to nuclear decommissioning. It is also increasing, but I believe a lot more can be done. But in order to do so, that mindset needs to shift, and decommissioning shouldn't be seen as a problem, a legacy, but actually to view it as a resource and how you can open up and use the site for something else, including building new reactors. We need holistic thinking, and we need to consider the local context, because every site is different, both the site itself and the local community. So, and that will influence what's the best future of the site, and how to go about it. A sustainable decommissioning approach, I believe, would reduce uncertainties. It would reduce the timelines, and it would reduce waste volumes and costs, because you would be doing a lot more repurposing, reusing of existing structures. And very important concluding remark, with the number of reactors that are coming online and need to be decommissioned, and the number of small modular reactors and large reactors that are being discussed and likely will begin construction in the coming years and decades, this is a window of opportunity to seize and really try to think long-term and revisit the norm. That means designing not only for decommissioning, but designing reactors for repurposing, design for life extension and power uprating and so on. So you have that longer circularity view in mind of, if you build something, use it for longer, use it for more, use it better, and that will make you both more sustainable and circular. So anyway, with that, I will end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christine. Maybe if we could have Christine in the big screen. Could you have that? But don't. Yeah, you can stop sharing, Christine, so that we can have you in the. So. Yeah. Oh, excellent! Now we can see you in a bigger screen. That's good. Makes it more lively. So. We have time for questions from you to Christine, but if you don't want to have to ask questions, we have questions for you. So no way to escape. So what I want to say in the first place is that the impression that we are giving is that we sat down before the meeting and we agree on the messages that we would give to the participants and prepare our slides accordingly. But I promise to you, I swear to you, that was not the case. But you saw many things that Christine mentioned were exactly in line to what the things you have heard before. For example, the holistic thinking, it has been repeated a few times in these discussions, right? The sense of getting the site into a beneficial use also has been pointed out. The rethinking about regulations, among other things. So you can see that the flow is not that much accidental, but the community recognizes some opportunities, recognizes some challenges, and we are working in a very well structured way to deliver that. So at this moment, questions from you. Tiago. Just to introduce happily, Thiago from Brazil.
Hello, Cristina. Thank you for the presentation. My name is Thiago. I'm from Brazil. And I work at the uranium mining, the first uranium mine in Brazil. So we are in this process of decommissioning, environmental remediation. So it's not like a question, it's just and I'm always trying to put our unit in some of this. What is our process? It's the decommission, environmental remediation, waste management. So looking at your presentation, I can see that maybe we are dealing with a complex site, a complex system with all of this, because we have acid mine drainage, we have waste management, radioactive storage, and the demolition and the dismantling of a platform, an industrial plant. So we have all of this, and to deal with all of this in the same framework, it's hard. So I think it's become a little clear for me what we maybe can do, but it's like would like to say just like this. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, very, very good here. And I'll just comment on, I think you bring up a good point that uranium mines are definitely complex adaptive systems, and where I don't know the situation at your site, but given the change and the expected increase, there can definitely be surprises. Maybe it will be economic to continue to operate it, for example, right? I think that might be the case in other mines, but I'm sorry, I don't know your example there, but I think that can be an outcome of if many more reactors. So if you have a uranium mine that people didn't think was going to be economical to continue to operate, and then if you build many more reactors or you extend life, all of a sudden maybe it's worth keeping it open, right? So it is very hard to plan, I think, a nuclear facility, including mines, because of these changing. I often I've said that instead of a plan with one assumed shutdown date, or whether it's a mine or a plant, maybe it would be valuable to create different scenarios. So you create, because I think very often the date that's set to close a power plant, it doesn't happen. Either they extend it by a year, 2 years. Sometimes they extend it, like happened in Canada recently. They decide, no, we're going to refurbish. We're not going to keep them for another 20 years. And sometimes it's already been shut down. Examples are where you shut down a plant to do maintenance, to change fuel. They discover an issue and they never restart. So if we, instead of thinking one, assume plan and date, all the steps you're going to do in preparing for it and after. And maybe it would be helpful to have multiple scenarios. What if we shut down, in 5 years, in 20 years, in 50 years? What? Just again, a different thought that comes out of complex adaptive systems thinking to plan for multiple scenarios could be of value in some cases, I believe.
Thank you. I guess that I can not summarize, but somehow rephrase what Tiago is telling, is that the presentations are opening perspectives in which he can consider in dealing with the site he is working at the moment. So I think it's a very valuable thing. Anybody else? I have a couple of questions to you, Christine. We have two colleagues here that make the presentations in the first day, and the situations that they face is the lack of resources to implement immediate decommissioning, immediate dismantling. And the strategy that's being pursued is entombment or safe enclosure. So in this sense, is there any alternative that can alleviate the situation and, on your experience, and then can favor the immediate dismantling, because it's not only funding but also a personal capacity building that is needed? What is your feeling on that? Any tip?
Very good question. I mean, it will depend on the site, right? What's on there, but I think many sites that there's more value than one might think. If you just think outside the box, like would it be possible to use part of it for training, or for something completely different that could provide value, that could provide revenue? Are there things that can be sold for other uses that are not on the site, just to keep some actions going? And then the last thought that comes to mind is it possible to separate the site into, not think of it as, oh, all of it, we can't do anything, we don't have the money. Are there things you can do on parts of the site while you kind of park and leave the rest, so to speak, maybe the more challenging ones, and isolate that, so at least you can provide value and ideally, again, income on the parts that would be available sooner.
Great. Another point that I wanted to ask is essentially, we at the agency, as you may know, we try to avoid speaking about remediation in the context of decommissioning, because two things. First of all, remediation is implemented in a completely different framework, legal framework, than decommissioning. In the first one, we use reference values, and it's about sites that were poorly regulated or not regulated at all and left legacy behind, while the decommission is a planned situation. It was part of the life cycle of the facility, so it falls into a what we call a planned export situation. And with that in mind, there is this understanding that the footprint left by, for example, nuclear reactors are really minimal in the environment. They are not really relevant footprint, like, for example, a mining operation, which per se has a very relevant footprint. But on the other hand, you just said that the perception of the people about a nuclear site, specifically nuclear power plant site, is refrain from facilitating the use of this site. How can you balance this apparent paradox? It's about communication, it's about demonstration, it's about showing compliance, all of this, or something else?
Sorry, I have to think about that. Could you say it again? Sorry.
No. My point is, in one hand, there is the belief that, or even the evidence that nuclear power plants, I'm talking about nuclear power plants, they leave a very small footprint in the environment. But on the other hand, you have the situation in which you mentioned that the public perception about nuclear sites are negative. So how you balance those two things?
I think they're small the footprint, even the larger power plants, but they tend to sit closer to populated areas, perhaps, at least than mines, right?
Yep.
Typically. So maybe that's one, that it's more closer. I think another difference is they're so, the density, of people working there, and it's definitely, I was thinking about that in preparing this, part of it's both site remediation and decommissioning, but maybe one key difference, I don't know if that's to your question, but site remediation, if at least when it comes to the land portion alone, there can be value in there, but maybe it's more of trying to avoid cost and trying to avoid creating more issues. Whereas decommissioning or site repurposing, what's on the nuclear facility, there's a lot of resources in there. There's a lot of potential value and resources, whether it's at the material level, your system structure level, people, knowledge, the infrastructure. I don't know if that's a difference or what you say. So yes, it can be a difference in size, but it's very dense, right? It's very concentrated in terms of the potential value of, if you think of that adaptive cycle, like all the resources that are built up, how you can use this and leverage them for something else, if that explains the difference.
Yep. Another couple of questions before we go to the question to the participants. One of them has to do with the life extension that you associated with potentially being part of a circular thinking. How does life extension nowadays is affecting the commissioning plans for the reactors that were in the pipeline for decommissioning? Is there any impact on that?
I think there is, and I think that my point is that I don't think it's considered, but I think it should, right? Because we know many countries' regulatory requirements is you have to have a plan, right? Even before you build something thing these days. That's a good thing. A decommissioning plan, that's a really good thing. And then you update it every 5 years or whatever. And those I've seen, at least, they assume one date, and then you provide assumptions for the things you do, the things you need. You need a waste facility to store the waste, process the waste, dispose the waste, and so on. So all these life extension projects are, I think they do need to be integrated. But as far as I know, I could be wrong, that's not really done today. And that's why I'm proposing, or as a food for thought, that instead of all these regulations requiring a planning date, maybe there should be multiple planning dates, different scenarios. What if you close down, you discover something, so you shut down much sooner, right? You will have less waste, but you will have less money. And you will be less prepared. And then you have your maybe, primary scenario, whatever. But what if you decide, which is happening, right? What should you decide very soon after? No, we're going to run it for another 5, another 10, another 20 years. It changes everything, right? But because of what, not the decommissioning itself, but all the interdependencies, like your need for waste facilities, you need for staff, you need for transportation infrastructure, all these things and money. You need to have the funding there. So I don't know that there is that link yet, but I think there should be.
Great. And my final question is, you mentioned clearance. We discussed about clearance during this week. removing materials from licensed facility. You mentioned there is a potential or even very concrete evidence that a lot of materials from a nuclear power plant, for example, can be put in beneficial use. In what extent, and this is eventually to raise awareness here in the colleagues in the audience, to what extent knowing that the material comes from a nuclear power plant can affect acceptance of these materials, even if these materials were cleared by a regulatory body?
The $1 million question. I don't dare to answer that, but it's yes, very very key to enable more circular flows, definitely. But I don't dare to try to answer. We can maybe ask the audience.
Well, in part, we have some things that are addressed here. So I will read the questions. I will assign aleatorily here a participant. I'm sorry, you are part of the whole thing. So the first question, and of course Christina will comment on the answer, is pay attention. If the buildings of a nuclear site are kept instead of being demolished, what can they be used for after the radiological hazards have been removed? Before I appoint a volunteer, is there anybody willing to answer the question? Oh, there are three. So do you mind if I will take the ladies first. I'm very conservative.
Hi, Christine. Thank you for interesting presentation and in decommissioning, because it's my job is decommissioning in nuclear sites. We are in Iraq have the same way, we have decommissioning the site, and our vision is kept the building in the up reactor and get a safe enclosure to be it's visitors, foreign visitors, because the site is the #1 in Arabic Middle East. I think it's established in 1957. So we proud Iraq. It's the first country in Arabic countries is established a nuclear research reactor. So after we demolish all the infrastructures and cooling tower and circuit rooms, and just only it's remained the reactor pool and core of the hot cells. So we can decommissioning about it, and that's the strategy of our country is to going to safe enclosure, so that we have it's the civilization landmark. We make it, inshallah, in the future.
Hungary, I will have a short answer. You can use the buildings maybe for isotope laboratorium or for X-ray laboratory as well.
Maybe some laboratories and in nuclear medicine.
Christine, do you want to comment on this?
No, just very good uses, and I like that you gave examples of radiological applications. I mean, of course, there can be non-radiological as well, but I think, especially if you want to, I mean, circular economy, as I mentioned, it's about finding the higher value, and so I think those are really good examples where you could actually use them to keep all the infrastructure, all the radiation protection, knowledge and practices and systems that are there, use them and do other work rather than having to build that somewhere else. So I think those are great examples.
Great, thank you. Let's go for the second question. What things on a nuclear site can be of value somewhere else? Who wants to take this question? So I'll repeat the question. what things on a nuclear site can be of value somewhere else.
Maybe I can just add to that and clarify that. So the previous question was intended, right? The fixed structures, the buildings and other things. But if you take, remember how I said initially, circular economy tends, at least that what I've seen, is mainly focused on the small things, the things you can move and transport. So that's what at the core of the questions, what things can be taken from a site and could be valuable somewhere else, if you can think of any examples.
Okay, hello Christine. I am Mohammed Ikram from Dawa Nuclear Power Plant in Egypt. Which parts could be extracted from the plant after decommissioning could be the programmable logic controls or controls, wires, some sensors, actuators could be, which is used to control the nuclear power plant, could be used in the oil and gas industry, for example. Some of conventional pipelines, some of tanks, and so on could be used in similar industry as an oil and gas or petrochemical industries. And that's it.
Great. Before I pass to Christine, what about? Introduce yourself. Don't forget.
Thank you. My name is Acopian Center. I'm from Uzbekistan. I think, I assume if successful decommissioning is done, we can use for other socio-economical purposes. For example, we can use for research, for training of operators for future nuclear power plants which will be built in this area. And maybe for another, maybe a suitable industrial zone for the future. Thank you.
Your comments, Christine?
No, I think, again, very good to think about other industries as well. I mean, and these things will depend on the country. If you have, and the site, because of course if it's very old components and so on, they might be still functional, but they might just be out of date if it's old technology, right? But I think there can be systems that can be used, like the example there from Egypt. Thank you. In a completely different industry where it's simple things like a pipeline and so on that was still intact. It can be challenging because of course the other facility needs to be optimized and it needs to have a very solid. But it's just the question was just to probe and think of things that can be used somewhere else because again it just because it's a waste or potential waste for someone, it can definitely be a valuable asset to someone else. We just need to think outside the box. Yeah.
Brilliant. Third question. I think this is a bit more challenging, but let's see. We have a very bright group of people here. Should future reactors be designed to simplify repurposing once operation has ended? I will repeat. Should future reactors be designed to simplify repurposing once operation has ended? So if the answer is yes, what are important considerations?
Yeah. And I'll just maybe clarify that we know there's so much work and nowadays in and highlighting the importance of designing for decommissioning, and that's absolutely key, right? I know the IAEA is driving that as well. But again, if you think after decommissioning, should we, and if so, how, design future reactors so that they will have a second life, so to speak?
Anybody wants to adventure? I would not. Christine, I think you should enlighten us with this one.
No, in my mind, it's just a yes. I don't know how. I think that a lot of work would need to go into that. And in fact, many things, I know I've seen some advanced drafts of IAEA documents. I know there's a tech doc on it, the way of designing for decommissioning. But I think many things would be the same as designing for decommissioning. Designed so that it's easy to decontaminate, that it's easy to take apart, that you don't have you choose material that doesn't with low low level of impurity, so that you don't create unnecessary like activated material in your construction materials and so on. So I think a large part, but I do believe there's some additional features that could be taken into account. What they are, I don't know. That's what I was generally. It was really just as a thought-provoking idea.
Yeah,
but,
that's very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, I think, for example, I'm more on the mining side, and for oxidizing uranium in the production, pyrolusite, manganese was used, and there was some. And then you have an issue with manganese,
Yes.
which is very mobile depending on the oxy-redox conditions. And then there was an option to use peroxide to do the oxidation of uranium, so that you can avoid the loads of manganese that would go into the environment. So these are the kind of things that might be used, for example, in the fertilizer industry, replacing sulfuric acid by nitric acid, so that you avoid the generation of large amounts of phosphogypsum. But there is the consequence that nitric acid would be more aggressive to the structures. So the bottom line here is to think about production ways in which you can maximize the benefits and minimize the detriment in the end of the operation.
Exactly.
Number 4, you guys, do you know of any repurposed building that are not non-nuclear? Do you have any idea of any operation out of the nuclear area in which the buildings of that facility has been served another purpose than its original purpose? You know? Yes, please. Just introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Müjde Andras from Armenia, energy expert. So we have in Armenia a few examples, like in Acopian city, some old facilities, industrial facilities right now are repurposed and used for food and beverage. Some of them are repurposed. We have the mushroom production there, and some sections are acting as refrigerator to keep these such products fresh. So these are some samples which are non-nuclear, but they're industrial facilities and be used for other purposes. Another option used is for recreational purpose, and also some co-working places I know in Georgia, not in Armenia, that they used to be industrial facilities.
Anybody else? I can mention about one in Vienna. There is two things that come to my mind. Maybe you know already about them. One is was a bunker that was used in the Second World War, and I was living nearby this bunker. And a bunker for avoiding bombarding should be very, very strong. So after the war was over, it would be very difficult to put down that structure because it was not meant to be demolished, right? So in that case, they developed what they call in Vienna Haus des Meeres, which is a kind of greenhouse, a place for botanical purposes, and have also animals in there, and it's open to visitation. That is a very clear example. And the other one is was the gasometer, yes. And now that they turned that structure in a shopping center. So these are examples that I can offer to you. Anyone, anything else you want to add, Christine?
Yeah, thank you for those very good and illustrative examples. I think one point is that even in the small town where I live, there's a former prison. It's now a hotel. Even going back even further, there was a military, very small fort. It's now a tourist attraction, and it's used for music concerts in the summer and so on. So if we start to look, I believe people are wired, that we're hardwired to use what we have for, again, like I said, for longer, for more things, for better things. But it's just that we kind of maybe in industrial times, we have this linear mindset, but if we start looking, it's probably everywhere, right? And that it's the norm outside the third industry, at least, to reuse, repurpose to a very large extent. We just kind of need to go back to that. That was my point, again, of
excellent.
thinking how normal it is. That so it shouldn't be hard to get to that point. It's just, yeah, that was my point.
Good.
Sorry,
Yeah.
may I? My colleagues also reminded that there is this shopping mall in Yerevan, which used to be an industrial facility, and after some rehabilitation and decommissioning, it turned to
one
that
more
shopping
example.
mall. Yeah.
There should be plenty of them, yes, but it fills the purpose. Final question is, and I think Catronel has some sort of contribution to this. Do you think members of the public will be interested in visiting a nuclear facility that is undergoing decommissioning? I'll repeat, do you think that members of the public will be interested in visiting a nuclear facility that is undergoing decommissioning? Why or why not? I just mentioned Catronel because of that survey that maybe you want to talk about it. If you can bring the... Catronel is one of the instructors working with us here, Christina.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you ask in terms of interest, I think that would be fascinating for members of the public. We see this whenever we organize open door days at our institute. People are so interested. For instance, the control room of the first Belgian research reactor that was constructed was taken out, and it's in our exhibition hall, and people find it really cool and want to take photos, etc. So I think that it would serve two purposes. One is to, in a way, provide knowledge and education to the public, and on the other hand, it would contribute to real and perceived transparency of how everything is being done. People having the opportunity to visit, I think that would be great. In fact, in Belgium, we are now 20 years in the decommissioning of a research reactor, and there is already a decision to bring everything to greenfield. But before that, when already some works were being done, it was used for a big concert, and it turned out it had a great acoustics. But unfortunately, let's say, the decision is already taken to demolish everything and bring it to greenfield. But I think that, definitely for cultural events, these kind of installations would be very useful. So in terms of your question, for sure, people would be fascinated to go in, because currently it's very difficult to actually enter a nuclear power plant. You need 1 million approvals. So being able to, witness this is something very cool, I think, for members of the public.
Anybody wants to enhance this question, this answer? Tiago again from Brazil.
In our case, Tiago, Brazil. In our case, it's in our uranium mine. So for the environmental law, we need to improve some programs, and we have 2 programs, one for communication, social communication, and another for environmental education. So for this program, we have some projects. One is a program for visitors for schools or universities. So we receive, I believe, 4 times a year. 4 or 5 times a year, and we can show the open pit, our laboratories, and other areas, free areas they can see. We don't have a big work doing now for the commission, but they can see the issue we have there.
Thank you. So, Christine, before we say goodbye to you or farewell, I think we will be working together soon. Do you want to have any final remark?
No, just thank you, and maybe 2 then, one on that last question. Thank you. I in my opinion too, we tend within the industry maybe to to not think that there's any interest. We think maybe there's only fear and that people are afraid of coming in. I don't believe so. And thank you for supporting that. That we underestimate how interesting or how cool we are, if you will, and that if we only bring down the fence and open the doors to the extent that's possible, of course, given safety and security aspects, I think having that transparency, having the exchange, because we can equally learn from the public, is really valuable. And of course, during decommissioning, why I mentioned that as an example is at least there's still safety and security aspects, but it's easier than during operation, right? So I think it would be really helpful. And these days too, when nuclear is becoming an emerging field again, and we need people to be interested, and we need to have people who want to work in the industry, right? So something that I believe should be encouraged. Last words, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a true pleasure and honor to be part of this, and I wish you the best for the rest of the week and the work back home.
Thank you, Christine. We missed you very much. Yeah, round of applause for Christine. We miss you very much with us because, of course, as you know, interaction on a daily basis, there is always something to ask, something to offer. Discussions are always taking place. And I hope, and I really hope that we can work together this time in person in a future meeting. This was, I think, a very successful one. I'm really impressed with the way the messages are flowing, the way things are going. And I don't want to be arrogant, but I think that this was one of the best courses that we have developed in this program of INT 2020 Interregional Project, because it matures a lot of the concepts and ideas that we have been thinking about over the last years, and bring us to a very updated, up-to-date status of looking to decommissioning and remediation, which is so very much needed. So thank you again. Appreciate, I think your lecture was to the point and make very important contributions to our discussions. Thank you so much. If I had a glass of beer here, I would say skål.
Skål. Cheers, and
Cheers.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and indeed hope to work together again. This has been excellent, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.